Good afternoon, welcome back to another Coastie Explores from a glorious Hong Kong. This is Tai O fishing village. It's been around for over 1,000 years, and for hundreds of years it was a small fishing village, regularly visited by pirates, so people did have to defend themselves here. And all things changed though in 1898 with the third unequal treaty by the British. The Chinese signed over this plot of land, the new territories, to the British for a 99-year lease. If you walk around the old village today, you'll see the old police station, maybe the one or two old post boxes from the British era. And that made me think, are there any other places in China that had a British lease? And I found one up north in Shandong Province, a place called Weihai. So join me as we go to Shandong Province and see what was the British legacy left behind in a tiny plot of land right on the end of the peninsula in northeastern China. Let's go.
So I jumped on a plane up to Qingdao, home of the Tsingtao Brewery, and then a 2-hour northeasterly railway trip to Weihai, now a thriving metropolis of over 3 million people. And whilst here, I'll also try and debunk or confirm the rumour that Margaret Thatcher, yes, the Iron Lady herself, was born or brought up in Weihai. Stay tuned to find out.
Following the Second Opium War in 1860, there was almost a scramble for China, as it was known by lots of European powers, but also from Japan as well. Now, the Germans took Qingdao in 1898 in a lease for 99 years, that's 2 hours south of here, and the Russians were in Port Arthur, the modern city of Dalian, just to the north of us. And the British wanted a buffer zone between the two, and they chose this area of Weihai as their port. Now, why did they want this part? Well, there was already a China fleet over on Liugong Island. The British and the Germans had helped give ships and armaments to the Chinese to bolster their forces in the 1880s and 1890s. In 1898, a lease was signed here for 32 years, up until 1930, or as long as the Russians were in Port Arthur. Now, if you want to find out more intricacies of that lease, go to my YouTube channel, because you will find a nice pictorial history of British Weihaiwei. Right, we cannot go over to the island today because the winds are too high, but we're going to go tomorrow in this video, so don't wait. So for now, I think we'll have a little walk down to this wonderful park and find out a little bit more about old British Weihaiwei. Now, how was this territory governed? Well, it was unlike most places in that it was governed under the Foreign Jurisdiction Act. That means it's very different from Hong Kong and other places because this had a commissioner, not a governor. Less in rank, but actually had more power effectively. Well, it was initially governed by the Navy to begin with in those very, very early days. First governor was Sir Stuart Lockhart. He'd been in Hong Kong. Loved China, could speak Chinese, had a great respect for the Chinese people, and when he left, he had a great send-off and was well respected by the Chinese people as well. The other notable one was Reginald Johnston. Again, he'd played a big part in Hong Kong before coming here, and he could even speak the local dialect here in the local area. So they were commissioners here, not governors. There were three main areas to the leased territory of Weihaiwei. One was the outer parts, up to 8 to 10 miles outside of the city. This was the countryside, which was full of farmers living in rural villages, pretty much governed under Chinese rule. I had a little venture out yesterday into the countryside and could still see farmers growing wheat and corn and peanuts. Peanuts are big here, and actually it was a magnificent sight because they lay out the corn and the peanuts all on the modern roads and toss it up in the air to dry, pretty much using the old methods that they did many years ago. In addition to the countryside, you've also got the city, which was just a bund, which is sort of a boardwalk around the bay here. This was known as Port Edward. It was named after King Edward the 7th. And he gave his name to the city, and that was where the British governor lived, Many of the large houses, the mansions, were located around the bay. And then finally there was the major area, which was Liugong Island, which we're going to go to in a short while, where we're going to try and find those old British buildings that are still there today. Now, in addition to those three areas, there's actually a fourth. This was an old walled city built during the Yongle Emperor in around 1403. Now, he built a walled city here, which would have had a yamen to govern the people in the area and to export trade all around the world. Now, on this spot was the walled city. In fact, there's a little bit of it in the background, a wonderful map on the floor. Now, this walled city in the lease, just like Kowloon walled city in Hong Kong in the new territories with that lease in 1898, this was run by the Chinese. So it was a piece of China within a leased British territory. Not unique because it was the same as the walled city in Hong Kong. It was once described by the British as a den of monsters because it got to a certain stage where gambling, prostitution, lots of things were taking place in the walled city, both this one and the one in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, there's no signs of this one today, just this little piece of the wall remaining. But we'll head down into the town now to have a little look at a little recreation of what that city would have looked like. They've done a really good job of recreating what the walled city of Weihai would have looked like all those years ago. And one of those things includes the Weihai hot spring. Now, this part of the city centre lies right on a fault line, so it's always had hot springs. And when the British came in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they created sort of Japanese-style hot spring baths, and they actually brought Japanese engineers over to create that atmosphere to attract more people to Weihai. And if you want to have a go at the hot springs, it's open every day. Just walking through the streets here, you've got to notice the little things. Do check out this little thing here. What do you think that was used for? It's a little pole. But this is known as a hitching post. And local Chinese people would hitch their donkeys or horses up to this point while they went into a shop. So a minor thing. Do keep your eyes open when you're walking around anywhere in the world for little historical gems. Now, one of the only British era buildings left here on the mainland is actually this one. This was the Vice Consul's house. Now, the Vice Consul would have lived here after 1930 when Britain handed back Weihaiwei to the Chinese. But it was initially the Vice Commander of the Chinese regiment that lived here back in 1902. So one of the oldest, if not the oldest building from the British era here, still on the mainland in Weihai. Day 3, the final day in Weihai. For 3 days I've been waiting for the winds to drop to get across to the old naval barracks on Liugong Island. Can I get across there today? Apparently, even though it's pouring with rain and I can hear the wind, the ships are running. So let's go and take a look at the old British Weihaiwei with some very British weather. And in some very British drizzle, I've made it onto Liugong Island just with a little trip. This island was originally part of the China fleet in the 1880s, and then following the Sino-Japanese War in 1895, transferred to Japanese control, and then after the British lease of 1898, it became British until 1930, when Weihai was handed back to the British. However, there was an extension of the lease for another 10 years. So in 1940, it was transferred back to the Japanese actually, because in 1937 they had invaded this part of China. So today on our drizzly walk around, we should see some Chinese, Japanese, and some British era buildings here. So let's see what we can find as we explore Liugong Island. One of the biggest attractions on the island is the Museum of the Sino-Japanese War here. So let's go in and take a look. Now, one thing you realise when you live in China is that they don't forget. They remember all of the things that have happened in the past, and that started really in 1841, 1842 with Britain forcibly taking Hong Kong after the First Opium War. The Second Opium War in 1860 as well. Treaty ports were opened up all over the country and more of Chinese land was handed over to foreign powers. So in 1894, Japan deliberately launched a war of aggression against China, which is known as the Sino-Japanese War of 1894-1895. And the Chinese fought valiantly for the sovereignty of their country. It's testimony to the determination and dignity of the Chinese soldiers and officers. China's defeat in the war pushed China into very much a national crisis. It was not only a war which upset the old balance of power in Asia, but also one that exerted a profound influence on the modern history of the world. And it certainly led to Germany taking Qingdao, the Russians in Port Arthur, and then of course the British lease of Weihaiwei in 1898. And just opposite the museum is this, our first British era building. This is the house of the naval commander of the British forces here in Liugong. Beautiful house. You could just imagine him coming out onto that balcony in the morning, looking out over the sea, checking the weather and checking the ships in port. Beautiful old house here. Check this out, this was the back garden of the commander of the Chinese fleet here. Probably a bit of an orchard out here. They do grow apples up here in Shandong Province. They've even got wineries up here. And this wall here, this is Pebble Dash. This is very much a British thing. My granddad's house in Bexhill-on-Sea had this. So Pebble Dash made it all the way to Weihai here. Check out these lovely manicured gardens over here. Well, they're not manicured gardens, they are an old golf course. Is it the oldest golf course in China? Well, no, that goes to Hankow. Further south from here, that was in 1870. In fact, there was a golf course just along the coast in Yantai in the 1880s, I believe, when that was a bit of a concession for British to trade with the local Chinese here. No, it wasn't until 1901 when two golf courses were built here. One here on the island for the naval officers and one on the mainland just across the sea as well. Just for Europeans at the time, very segregated. Got some nice old pictures here of a Chinese young boy caddying and some of the old golf course buildings. I can't find any today. What other sports were big here in Weihai? Well, you had polo, horse riding, hunting was big here, and for both British and locals, football was extremely big here, and the British would play the locals very often and have matches against other places up and down the coast. Also, track and field was big. There were tennis courts here and also cricket pitches, and you might be able to make out some cricket nets in this picture here. Right, let's keep walking around the wonderful Liugong Island. Well, maybe this is the old clubhouse here. It looks fairly new though, but it looks as though it's overlooking what would have been the first fairway. And here you can clearly see in the distance are some old looking bunkers that were around. It would have been a beautiful course back in the day. This old Chinese map on the wall shows us clearly that it was about an 8 to 10 mile loop around from the coastline, from the north coast to the east coast here at the end of the peninsula, and Liugong Island, about 2 kilometres off the coast from where the administration would have been led from, next to the old walled city, just to the north on the bay there. Also a nice graphic here of the bay of the mainland. You can see the old walled city. As we went round, there were more and more British style buildings, and then it eventually finished pretty much at the end where the King's Hotel was, the grandest hotel in Weihai. 80 bedrooms, a swimming pool, tennis courts, and even an ice machine. There we go. Another interesting map here. This shows the situation of the Weihai people's anti-British movements. You can see right along the edge of the concession, lots of different villages fought against the British in those first couple of years because they did not want this piece of land even to be leased to the Britain. This was very similar to the new territories in Hong Kong. In 1899 there was a 6-day war of the new territories when people in the countryside tried to fight back against the British. Now, it was mainly the British Navy and some army officers living here on Liugong Island, and we can see an old British military band here. But here we've got some soldiers of the old Chinese regiment. This was set up in the very late 1800s, and the Chinese regiment were used to fight in the Boxer Rebellion against the Chinese up in Nanjing and Beijing. In the late 1800s. They actually policed this area as well until about 1906 when the regiment was disbanded. They've done a great job in the museum of recreating what some of the shops and the streets would have looked like back in the British era. Photographers were big here. Everyone, both Chinese and British, wanted their photograph taken back in the early 1900s. What were there? Butchers, dressmakers, tailors, everything you would find in a normal place they had here on Liugong Island. Now here's an interesting fact. That is the flag of British Weihaiwei, a Union Jack in the corner and 2 Mandarin ducks. But it never originally was like that. It used to have the Qing Dynasty yellow flag that is so common within the flag, and when Governor Lockhart came, he didn't see that as being right, so he changed it to a scene of 2 Mandarin ducks. So there we go. And right at the end of the British Museum here we have a little scene of the rendition of Weihai in 1930 being handed back to China. Of course, this island itself was leased for another 10 years until the Japanese took it in 1940, just before the British went to war with Japan. Right, let's head and see if we can find a church or two. Let's go. And right here we can see the China Post building. Now, not the original post office. Back then it would have been on the main street down here. It would have had stamps that you could buy to send mail back to the UK. That mail would have probably gone back via Hong Kong in the early days. The stamps used to have the king's head on. It used to be stamped with Weihaiwei or China sometimes. And there probably would have been, potentially there could have been a red Queen Victoria post box here because she was on the throne when this leased territory was taken, but probably an Edward VII post box would have stood somewhere here and one on the mainland. If you are interested in post boxes, do check out my 3-part post boxes in Hong Kong series. I'll put it in the link below. And after a lot of walking in the rain, we've come across St James's Church of England Church. Now, this was the Church of England one, and just along the road would have been the Roman Catholic one. Unfortunately, it's not in use today. It does look well maintained from the outside. Love this old pebble dash in, very British style pavement here in front of the church. Now, as well as these two churches, there would have been schools here for the local Chinese population, but also for any British students that were here. It's very much a Christian-based school system for both Chinese and British. In fact, many British used to come up here in the summer from Hong Kong to escape the humidity there, maybe to see relatives who lived on the island, or just wanted to escape to a place in the sun up here on the Shandong Peninsula. Now, this here is one of the most famous buildings on Liugong. It's known as the Queen's Building during the British era, but you may notice it looks very Chinese, and that's because it was built before the British arrived. This was the old naval commander's residence for the Chinese fleet back in the 1880s. It then changed to be the Queen's Building, and seamen would use this for cinema. The first cinema in Weihai was here, and just nights out, enjoying themselves was taking place here in the Queen's Building. A bit like, if you've seen my Qingdao video, the Seaman's House in the centre of Qingdao, or the Sailor's Home in Sai Ying Pun in Hong Kong. A beautiful old building though. Backed just in here was the actual office of the Admiral of the Beiyang Fleet way back in the 1880s, 1890s. Now, one of the things that Weihai is famous for over here in China is the Chinese Labour Museum. Over 100,000 Chinese people were sent to the fields of Flanders to work for the British and the French in the war effort in World War I. And I went along yesterday when it was a little bit drier to the museum here.
During World War I, while nations fought in the trenches, a massive, often forgotten migration was underway. Over 140,000 Chinese labourers were recruited by the Allies and shipped to the Western Front. Their ordeal was immense. They endured grueling voyages, brutal work conditions, and the constant threat of shellfire and disease. They dug trenches, repaired railways, and handled munitions, the essential dangerous work behind the front lines. A huge proportion of these men, over 40,000, came from the region around Weihai. They left everything behind and gave everything for the war effort. And when the war ended, their story didn't. Some of these men, unable to return, settled in the UK. They became some of the very first Chinese settlers in British port cities like Liverpool, planting the seeds for communities that still thrive today. This isn't just a forgotten story of the war, it is a story of China's unsung contribution to world history, and the museum is just one step in bringing that story to light.
Now, one of the things I've been looking forward to most about the trip is walking down this street here. This is Seymour Street, named after Admiral Edward Seymour. There's also one on the mainland just opposite, because I found pictures of Seymour Street in both. Now, this was common in British territories all across the world, where you would name streets after prominent politicians, admirals, generals, things like that. In Hong Kong, we had two prominent Robinson Roads back in the day, but they found that a little bit too challenging to have two Robinson Roads in Hong Kong, so they changed the one on Kowloon side to Nathan Road after the governor, Sir Matthew Nathan. So here there were two Seymour Roads by the look of it, and this is very much the main street of Liugong Island. And this western side is very much the old port side where things got done with. You can still see the rails on the floor leading into the different warehouses. I have managed to find a map from 1930 that tells us what every single one of these buildings would have been used for, but there's so many different buildings that it's impossible to go through them all today. Now on the western tip, we've got some really old naval school buildings. Probably the head of the naval school was in this one. This is a building that's no longer here. Another British style residence over there. In fact, the Navy is still here today. There is a Chinese Naval Academy here on the island. You can see them marching around. And there's an old submarine base where you can actually go on a submarine with your ticket. So there we go, get yourself here. If you're a regular watcher of Coastal Explorers, you know I like to go on about the engineering of the British in their different places, and Liugong Island is no different. Check out the drainage of this. On days like this, you very much need some good drainage systems, as we know well in Hong Kong. Now this long road here up the west side, this is Queen's Road, believe it or not. Very famous Queen's Road in Hong Kong. This one nowhere near as grand, probably named after either Queen Victoria or Queen Alexandra, who was Edward VII's wife. Now way out west we've got a fort here that would have defended the west side of the island. Now there were batteries all over the island, tending to face north, east and south, but not west, because that's where Weihai was. But when the Japanese invaded, this is where they hit. They hit from the west, they invaded the mainland first and attacked the island from the one direction that the guns weren't actually firing at. And right behind me is what's left of the old British cemetery here. Unfortunately, I think it was desecrated in the 1940s when the Japanese were here. So not much sign of any of the graves today, but many souls are out there from many different nations who fought out here, both Chinese, British, many buried here overlooking the ocean.
And now to find out if Margaret Thatcher was indeed born in Weihai. Well, no, she wasn't, and she didn't visit either that we have records for. It's thought that her uncle was in the Navy and stationed in Liugong Island at one time, but we cannot verify this, so that is fully debunked. She is indeed the daughter of a grocer from Grantham.
If you do get a chance, get inside the fort, because there is an amazing museum here which tells you so much about the Japanese-Chinese War of 1894-95. It's got lots of recreations, it tells you how to load and fire cannons, and all the history of the island and the fortifications here. Now I think, if I've got my bearings right, this was the old surgeon's residence here, and then right next to it this would have been maybe some minor officers' houses, now home to some dogs and goats by the look of it. But an interesting fact, I was out in the countryside the other day, and the houses in the villages here used to be thatched with seaweed. A very popular way of keeping warm in the winter time, and it is bitterly cold out here in Shandong Province in the winter. Like a very official building here. I'm not sure what that was, but police station. There would have been a police station here back in the day, as there would have been on the mainland. There was actually two prisons here. There was one on the mainland, just a very small one. I got a picture of it here, and there was also one here, a bit larger one on Liugong Island. But for anyone who did any real serious crimes, they were actually put on a ship here and sent all the way to Hong Kong to Victoria Jail, which was a lot more secure. So that's about it for this Coastal Explorers. Thanks for joining me today on this historic walk around Liugong Island. I brought the British weather with me, that's for sure. Love learning about the British era here, but also the Chinese history of the island, the Sino-Japanese War, and just finding out all about a wonderful Shandong Province. This is my end of a week-long trip up here, so do check out my Qingdao video if you haven't. Time to leave the old Seymour Street and head back to my nice, warm, comfortable hotel room. Bye for now, and we'll catch you on the next one.